Welcome to the Teapot Reads. My name's Sam. I'm the Teapot. This is what I'm currently reading, and I am so happy to see you today. I'm just gonna cut to the chase. This is my review of The Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros, the book that took the internet by storm and that for a while everyone was claiming was the best fucking thing ever written, ever. Like, it had the highest ratings on Goodreads. You never saw people really hate reading it. I think at this point things have mellowed out a little bit, and while it's still a big book and a lot of people are really into it, there have been some more reviews coming out of just like it's like not that good. And I wanted to read this book intentionally. I wanted to read this book intentionally with the idea that I would be reviewing it. So I did go into it with the mindset that I would be paying attention to it in a way that I'm not always paying attention to books. Like, sometimes you read a book just to have fun, and I wasn't going to like disregard that. I wanted this to be a fun book, but I did go into it knowing I would be judging it, and that was kind of my whole goal of reading it. I did not go into it wanting to hate it. I did not go into it expecting to love it either. I really did go into it very cynical and expecting this could not be nearly as good as everyone seems to be insisting it is. And I think that it was really not for me. And I think that it was really boring and a waste of time and money. But I'm not going to sit here and nitpick every single thing in this book, because in good faith, it's not objectively a bad book, and it's not really a problematic book. I had some issues, but I don't think it's a toxic book, and I don't want to just hate dump on this. That said, I will tell you right off the bat, I gave it 3 stars, and that's maybe a little generous. I think 2.5 is probably a more accurate rating, but I am giving it 3 stars because it did evoke some emotion from me. The very end of this review, I will go into some spoilery things, and I'll probably touch on some things in the early part as well, but it's nothing that's going to ruin the experience. I will have a spoiler section that is just gripes and just problems I have with the book, and that will be time-stamped, so if you want to check that out, yeah, follow the link or look at the chapters down below. I'm gonna put this here just because I don't want to be carrying it the whole time. It's not really in focus, but I don't want to be holding it the whole time. We're gonna start with the things I liked. We're gonna start on a positive note. I liked the representation. I liked that Violet had a disability, and I liked how that was treated through the book for the majority of it. The camera is apparently slipping. Sorry about that. Just a slow decline and slide. I liked that. I liked that Violet had a disability. I like how it affected her. I like how it was treated. I thought it was treated with respect. I believe it is EDS, although they never say that in the book. That's what people have confirmed outside of the book. And as someone who has chronic pain and sometimes a lot of issues, even just walking every day, I really appreciated that. It was really great, and I thought it was done really respectfully, and the fact that we have her not only succeeding, but not overcoming it in a way well, now I am past it, now it's not a problem. It's always still a part of her, and it's not a part that she ever expresses hate for. She's frustrated by it sometimes, but she has ways of making her life work around and because of. And there's even something really great early on with her mother who says something along the lines of, Violet should be a writer. She experiences more pain every day than most people ever will, and that makes her strong. And I was like, that is such a great way to look at it and flip it, especially in the scenario of this book. So yes, I appreciated that. I also appreciated that it is a queer normative, a queer positive world, which if you have visited this channel before, you've probably noticed that I am a big fan of that. Violet and Xaden, who are our main couple, I don't think either of them are queer, although not confirmed. I'm not reading the sequel, so I'll never have it confirmed, but maybe you will in a later book that they're not. But there are pretty much a populous world full of queer characters, and it seems queer normative. There's never any comment on relationships other than don't get too attached because your classmates might die, but it has nothing to do with sexuality or gender, and I really appreciated that. I thought it was good. As for race, I think that there is representation, I should say, but I had a harder time kind of picturing and remembering characters, which I'll talk about in things I didn't like about this book. So I don't remember. I don't think Xaden is white, but he also might be not white in the same way that like characters in Sarah J Maas are like tan, but still white. You know how she does that. Another thing I really liked is that there was this twist kind of in the middle of the book. I'm not going to spoil it. It is not a huge twist, but it did well, I guess it is fairly huge for that point in the book, but it did legitimately take me by surprise. On Instagram, in my stories, I kept everything as, I forget what they call it, like a memory or whatever. It's on my Instagram profile, and that'll be linked down below if you want to check it out. But it's around chapter 15, I think, where I was just like, oh, wait, that's exciting. That's really cool. I really liked that. It was a good twist. It caught me off guard as a reader who was, at that point, not even super invested in it. And I really thought that was going to be a point where things started turning up. And for a very small period, they did. I think the middle was probably, or the first half of the middle was probably the best part of this book. And this is also around the time when we see the dragons and the dragons are introduced. I mean, they're there before this, but this is when we start to get to know about dragons more. And I really liked that. In general, I liked the dragon stuff. I think the classification by tail and color was really cool, especially the tails. I thought that was unique. I thought it fit really nicely into the world that was built. It's a super martial world. It has dealt with a lot of war. I mean, she's at a war training school, which, side note, I did not take the moment to like describe what this book is about. I'm assuming you already know. And if you don't already know, just Google it. Like, it's everywhere though. You probably already know. But I liked them. I thought the classification system was neat. I think it allows a really wide variety of classifications moving forward in this series, and it's this great pool. It's wide enough where you can keep adding things without having to retcon anything, while also being narrow enough that it would make sense. You know, like it makes sense. You don't feel like you're missing information. And later in the book, as we learn more about dragons after Violet binds with the dragon, I feel like that's not a spoiler to say, because literally what would the book be about if she didn't? She learns a little bit more about dragon culture, I guess, and I think it's just interesting, and it worked really well, and I enjoyed all that part. The colors was also really interesting. I couldn't like sit here and tell you what was the most powerful color or tail type, but it also doesn't seem super important, besides knowing which specific dragons we meet in the book are super powerful. And I didn't actually have a problem with not being able to like list off different like power types. Like I don't need an Ars Arcanum for this book. And I was okay with what we got in text for that part of the world building. I don't actually have that many notes on the world building. It's very fine, and I think that's a good measure of this book in general. It's fine. The writing is fine. The characters are fine. The plot is fine. The world building is fine. I think that this is a good introduction to fantasy and romantasy for readers who don't normally find themselves in this genre. In a lot of ways, I would compare it to Sarah J Maas's ACOTAR series, and that it is a great place to start if you're curious and if you want more fantasy leaning stories. But for someone like me who has read a bunch of it, it doesn't really hold water. Like I do have, in my gripe section, I am going to talk about one thing in particular I had a problem with world building wise, but it's sort of like world building levels of a YA novel or a typical YA fantasy novel. That's not a dig. It's just that with YA novels, you're not expecting them to do as much or be as intricate or in world, because they just don't have as many words or as many pages or as much time to get these things across. But with an adult novel, I do expect a little more. As it was, it's fine. Nothing really seemed inconsistent. There's no champagne in the book. There's pens, but they have like an in-world reason for pens, and it was fine. It's fine. It's a good introduction for fantasy and romantasy, and I hope that people who are really flocking to this book will flock out. And romantasy is sort of like the growing genre, like subgenre of fantasy at the moment, so it's a good place to start, and I'm excited to see what kind of comes of this. I compared it at one point to Twilight, and I think it is really accomplishing something very similar to Twilight. I'm gonna talk about that a little bit in a moment, because it's not really a positive comparison. I do have a really soft spot for Twilight, but I do think that to some degree this is serving like Twilight, in that it's a great introduction to reading for some people, and more specifically to reading fantasy for some people. One thing I really appreciated at the beginning of the book was how often named characters were being killed off. You would get a named character and even get a little bit of their backstory, or maybe a lot of their backstory, and then they would be killed. And it was brutal, and it was great, and it was actually something that I really appreciated and could really get behind. You know, I would compare it actually to Lost. If you ever watched Lost, named characters on that show die a lot, and it is sad, but you almost don't have enough time to process it because you're moving at such a rapid pace through things happening, and even though you're like heartbroken, you have to keep moving on, and it's really great. I think Game of Thrones does it somewhat decently as well, the TV show, but it does give you a little bit more time for grief for more important characters, and there's a little more drama around the deaths. Not to say there's not drama to deaths in Lost or in this book, but it's like so frequently happening with these characters that you start getting like these touches of humanity from. And I thought it was great. I thought it was brutal. Again, thought to fit really well into this martial world that had been created. It really helped up the stakes, and it made me really cautious about connecting with any of the characters. It made me kind of sit in the same boat as Violet and be like, wow, if I get attached to these characters, any of them could die. About halfway through the book, though, it becomes clear that we've kind of gotten through all of the major killings, and anything else that's going to happen is going to be like a big plot-driven moment and not just like a, oh damn, this school is scary and hard. We kind of stopped losing named character deaths around the halfway point when the dragons come in. Not to say there aren't any after that, but there really aren't any after that. That surprised me. And yeah, the stakes around that point like completely dropped off. But for the first half of the book, when it's happening, I could really get behind it and really appreciate it. I thought that was a great way to start the book, and it definitely got me on the right foot. I think that is something this book did really right, is it starts surprisingly, because the first chapter did not have me, but by the second chapter, it starts at a point where I was like interested and intrigued, and I can see why a lot of people were drawn to this book and really felt themselves propelled through it. And most of all, kind of looking outside the book itself, the thing I like and appreciate about this book is, like I said, that it is getting more people to read, and it is sort of building up this community in a great way. This also, as much as it was a book that obviously the publisher wanted to do well, that's why the first edition has those beautiful sprayed edges. It's not a book that was like being shoved in your faces. Like, I work at a bookstore, and it wasn't something that when it came out we were like told, oh, or leading up to it come out, we were told, oh, let's like market the hell out of this. And I really like that it kind of came up sort of grassroots, and that it propelled this author into a whole nother level. And I'm legitimately happy for people out there who have read this book and love this book. I personally love dragons, and anything that's dragon entertainment makes me so happy. And it is big, and it makes me really happy when people are really excited and happy about reading. And the amount of people, customers I've had come into the store and just get so excited when I'm like, yes, we do have a copy of Fourth Wing, here you go. It makes me legitimately happy. And like I said, this book, I don't think it's toxic or problematic. I really didn't find any issues with it. I'm not like the be-all knowledge on that sort of thing. But the one thing I did have a gripe with, which I'll talk about later, I don't think it's necessarily toxic. I think it's just sort of a very gentle trope, and I personally just did not vibe with it. I genuinely, it's like James Patterson. I don't like James Patterson or his books, but I'm happy that he gets people reading. Like, that's great. Reading is probably the best thing you can do. That is like all the good stuff I really have to say about this book, which is not very much. So we're gonna go right into the things I disliked, starting with the characters. They're all very, very flat, very, very boring. Every single one of them. I think that the side characters are the ones that are hit the hardest, which makes sense, but even Violet and Xaden and Taryn and Darth, what's the dragon's name? Oh my gosh. I think it's Endarna. The characters are all very, very flat. Violet and Xaden particularly, even though they were told quite a bit that they have backstories, and we get sort of important aspects of it, like Violet was training her whole life to be a scribe up until like 6 months before the book starts. We don't get her really reflecting on that at all. She sure uses her knowledge, which, talk about that in a fucking second. I honestly did not think she was that clever of a character. She was like, no, you know, we'll talk about it now. Why put that off? She is like supposed to be really smart, but anytime she came to a conclusion, I was like, oh no, that's like the most obvious conclusion, actually. The fact that other people didn't notice it, I get that you're trying to make an argument that, oh, they don't have scribe training, they only think a certain way. That's fine, but she never thinks outside of the box. if she comes up with something before the reader is able to, it's because she has information that the reader literally does not have. And I was like, this is not how you write a clever character. This is just kind of how you write a competent character. And for a military academy, you're really telling me none of these other people, especially legacies, didn't have like training leading up to this point besides fighting training. There weren't other people out there thinking about schematics and schemes and, you know, reading their world's version of Sun Tzu. You're really telling me that? I didn't buy it. I thought that was ridiculous. And she misses being a scribe, and she'll talk or think about her father sometimes, but we really don't know anything about him other than he was a scribe and that he wanted her to be a scribe, that he loved her. And we get a couple like plot relevant facts, but him as a person, we don't really know anything about. And her as a person prior to literally the book, we don't know anything about except for, oh, she wanted and was training to be a scribe, and this is her family, and she was close with her brother and her sister, but her brother's dead, her sister's off, and she doesn't have a good relationship with her mom. Okay, fine. But Violet, and she was friends with Dain before he joined the academy. And it's like, Violet, but you had more to life than that. Like, what did your daily life look like? What are some habits that you have to like break at this point? What things would you do in your daily life that helped with your EDS? Who did you have relationships with before that? She literally gives no thought to like anyone, but you get the sense that she's had at least some sort of relationship before this book starts, because she doesn't express that she hadn't. And she also, like, the way she acts with her sister and her friends, it's like, oh, no, you seem like you've known people and you've been in relationships. We don't get anything. We don't get, like, any, like, deep understanding of her, except exactly what we see in the present on the page. And she felt like she was a character that didn't exist until she walked into this book, and that is literally how everyone feels. Xaden too, even though he's literally a child of this rebellion that happened, and we know, again, like slight plot relevant things, but we don't really know anything about him. What is he like? What does he do in his free time? What was his childhood like? I get he's mysterious, so we probably wouldn't get nearly as much about him, but he, like, emotionally, where's the trauma? Where's the damage? He claims he has some, and Violet seems to think there is some, but as a reader, I'm not seeing anything on the page that makes me think, oh, this was a kid who grew up with a lot of strife. Sure, we get, again, facts about him, but the facts tell me so very little, and I'm trying so hard not to spoil things. Even the big thing that we find out, or the couple of the big things that we find out later in the book, I don't feel like it confuses his character or explains his character. I just feel like, oh, here's another, like, tidbit about him, but who is Xaden? I don't know. Side characters are hit even harder. Rhiannon, is that her name? Dain, who are they outside? We get, again, facts. We know Rhiannon has a family. We know a little bit about Dain, but we don't actually get to know them as characters on an emotional level. We don't really have anything to connect us to them. Facts without emotion is not good character building. It's just, here you go. It's very elementary character building, and it led to such boring characters, boring interactions. The dialogue really didn't propel me through because I didn't feel like the dialogue really served for anyone to grow. I think especially Violet did not grow at all over the course of this novel. She gained power, and we're going to talk about that, but she did not as a person grow. Sure, we're told she changed, but we don't actually get to see the change because we don't know what Violet was like before Basquiat, or however you say the name of the school. We do not know. And so you can't really say, wow, this character grew and changed. We just say, wow, this character stayed fairly stagnant and maybe did some new things and learned some new skills, but as a person didn't really ultimately change, because we don't know where she's changing from. And because they were such flat characters, the tension, the romantic tension between Xaden and Violet was fucking shit. The entire time it was bad. Okay, they did have really good sexual tension, and the sex scenes actually were really good. I could really get behind those and appreciate them. The romantic tension didn't exist. There was no chemistry there. It was two very boring people mashing faces together or doing things. There's a point where Violet says that he showed her love and kindness or something like that in like a million different ways, and then goes on to list like the literal bare minimum ways he's treated her as a human being and nothing else. And I was like, Violet, neither of you have done romantic things for each other, even in the context of a war school. He was keeping you alive because if you died, he died. He was being nice to, the only cute thing was when he brought her flowers. That's cute. I liked that. We should have seen more moments like that. But he was like literally doing the bare minimum and not trying to kill her. And like, that's not romantic on its own, especially because even though the book claims is an enemies to lovers romance, it's fucking not. It's not. At no point in the book do I feel like Xaden ever wanted to hurt Violet. Even at the beginning when she's convinced he wants her dead and people are telling her, don't get alone with Xaden, he's going to try to kill you. He never makes a move. And he's even like, I'm just waiting for the right moment. But as a reader, I was never like, he's really biding his time. He's putting her in situations where she's gonna get hurt. No, he was just treating her literally like another student. Which is great because he wasn't then like coddling her, but it wasn't romantic and it wasn't an enemies to lovers. She hated him for a little bit, but mostly she was just scared of him. And then when she realized he had no bite, it wasn't like, ooh, well, now I attack you. It was just like, oh, I guess he's not a threat. I think I love him. Like, it was rough and awful and just boring. And don't call it enemies to lovers unless you're literally enemies trying to fucking kill each other. Or it even doesn't have to be like that extreme. I read Divine Rivals recently. That's how you do enemies to lovers. That's how you do enemies to lovers, okay? They're not even trying to kill each other. They're just like antagonistic towards one another. And it works. And it works. And it's not toxic. And they can still get together. Fourth Wing is not that. Fourth Wing did not have that. And again, there was no romantic chemistry. There's no reality outside of sex where I see these two together. I'm sure they'll end up together. Maybe not. Maybe there will be a plot twist later because it's like a 5-book series, I think, planned. But we're like literally the most boring people to read about being in a relationship. And that's that on that. Actually, no, I do have one other note. The fact that he calls her Violence like it's supposed to be a cutesy nickname, it wasn't cutesy, it was clunky, and it wasn't even really that appropriate. Sure, she had like outbursts and was like very anti-Xaden, but it wasn't like, she wasn't like a violent person. As someone who is a violent person, which might surprise you, like if I get slighted, my first reaction is like, I should fucking slice their tires. I don't, I have self-control, but legitimately my reactions to things are violent. I've always been that way. Violet is not a violent person. She uses violence as a tool sometimes, but she's not a violent person. And the nickname wasn't cute. Like I said, it was clunky. Every time he's like, hey there, Violence. I'm like, that's not cute. That's not sexy. That's just annoying. Just call her like Violet. Or if you're gonna call her like Violence, don't literally only call her Violence. Like only use it like every once in a while. Like, I was like, I feel like you just don't know her name. And you're like, it was Vi something. Violence. Well, that's right. Like, it was stupid. It was stupid. But that's that on that. I can't complain about their relationship any longer because it will drive me mad. Fight scenes. Fight scenes were pretty bad. They were either too short or too long. And they were weighted very strangely. There's a lot of emphasis early in the book that this competition is going to be heavy on the fight scenes and like dueling between each other, that you could die, but we see almost none of those. We see some of them, so I'm not going to say we don't see any of them. And Violet does have unique ways of getting around these because, again, she's dealing with EDS, and I did appreciate that aspect of it, but the scenes themselves were really poorly coordinated. It was hard to follow things that were going on, and because it's a first-person narration, I think that also was a real weakness for the book and for the fight scenes in particular, especially the bigger, longer fight scenes. I had a really hard time grasping the breadth of battles and what was going on. I do think that this is something that a lot of writers struggle with. I don't think this is unique to Fourth Wing or Rebecca Yarros, but it was particularly important in this one, and they were just all disappointing. I was either confused or bored, or for the few exciting ones, they moved too quickly that I couldn't even like enjoy them. So yeah, they were just balanced and weighted really strangely. The last big complaint before we start getting into spoilers is that the plot was fairly predictable. After that plot twist that I was praising earlier in this review, after that plot twist, it becomes fairly predictable. Both in and of itself, like there are things set up in the book, it's like, oh, clearly it's going to go this way, as well as just following the sort of romantasy formula that exists at this point. There aren't too many romantasy books. There are a lot, but there aren't too many that have gotten big, but they are all sticking to very similar formulas. I would say there's probably like two formulas, and those formulas are: we are forced into close proximity. That's how it starts. Either we're forced into close proximity for some reason, or I'm choosing to enter forced proximity to kill you. Those are the two. Like, I wasn't planning to be in forced proximity, and no, I'm choosing to because I'm going to try to kill you or trick you or something similar. They're fairly predictable after that point. I am personally trying to branch out and read more romantasy because I do genuinely like parts of the genre. I'm a big Sarah J. Maas fan, for better or for worse. She's quite the guilty pleasure. And I have read From Blood and Ash, and I didn't want to cut my eyes out. I actually feel like From Blood and Ash was slightly better than Fourth Wing, although it's been a little bit since I read From Blood and Ash, so I might not actually mean that, and I've only read the first one. I've heard they get worse. And even having read only a very small portion of Romantasy, it was predictable, and that just led to it being boring. Now, before I go into the spoiler stuff and possibly lose some of you watching this review who don't want to be spoiled, I do want to just circle back to the comparison with Twilight. I do kind of compare it to Twilight with dragons for a couple reasons, besides the sort of place it has fallen into pop culture at this point. I think that Fourth Wing also has a lot of Twilight tropes. It is, I believe, now I haven't read Twilight in a while, but I believe Twilight is first person narration from Bella's point of view. Could be wrong, but I don't think I am. Fourth Wing is first person narration from Violet's point of view, and both Violet and Bella are really good characters that the reader can put themselves onto. I think that's one of the reasons Violet is so boring, especially to me. I don't want to imprint myself on Violet. I don't really read for books where I can fill myself into the characters. I like first person narration. I like the Dresden Files. I like Robin Hobb's books, but there's more first person than that. Those were just the first two that came to mind. They're still really strong characters with strong personality that comes through. And both Violet and Bella really don't have much personality, and therefore easy to imprint upon as a reader. I think there's comparisons there. I think that Xaden and Edward Cullen have a lot of comparisons, especially with how they treat their romantic interests. Both men are very interested in protecting their romantic interests. And Xaden has his little group of people who are protecting Violet, and Edward has the Cullens who are protecting Bella. And there is this sort of like safety bubble put around these characters. They also sort of, I want to say, and I am going to stick with my gut because I do believe this, they both don't necessarily underestimate the romantic interests, but they don't consider them on a level. And that's sort of frustrating as a reader. I think that it makes sense to call Fourth Wing Twilight with dragons. And that's where I'll leave you if you don't want to see anything spoilery, because we're going to go into it. I have 4 bullet points here. Yeah, 4 bullet points. And it's going to be a little bit of rant. So if you like a good rant, here it is. But this will spoil things. There's a trope I fucking hate. Okay? There's a trope I hate. I'm sure at one point I did like it, and I'm sure in some scenarios it might be a good trope, and it might have, you know, a unique twist on it. But I don't think I've read a trope like that in a long time, or a twist on this trope in a long time, and every time I come across it, it annoys me, and I find it very impractical. I find it hard to believe. I guess I shouldn't say it's hard to believe, but for me as a person, when I come across this, like, my reaction to these things, if it were like my life, I would trust what the other person says, I guess. So I think this falls into miscommunication a little bit, but it's also like lying. And the trope is, one character says, "Don't trust me. I'm not a good person," or "Don't trust me. I have a secret that's going to upset you." And the other person says, "I don't care what your secret is. I trust you. I love you. I know you enough." And the character one says, "No, no, 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 no. But you don't know I have the secret. You should not trust me. Don't trust me. I'm telling you, don't trust me." "No, no, 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 no. I do. I trust you. I trust you. It does not matter what your secret is. It does not matter to me." "Well, okay, sounds good. We're in love, blah, blah, blah." "Oh no, my secret has come out," or "I've told you my secret." "What the fuck? Your secret is awful. How could I trust you? How could I love you? I can never love you. I can never trust you. I'm leaving. I don't love you anymore. Even though you gave me literally every warning, like even though you literally said, 'Don't trust me,' I said, 'No, I trust you,' and actually I don't fucking trust you. That was a lie. I just wanted to sleep with you." Maybe not that little last bit. But that's literally what happens. Xaden tells Violet. I don't really like how he tells her. He says, don't fall in love with me. That's bullshit, Xaden. That's bullshit. Stay the fuck away from her then. But Xaden tells her, I have a secret. Don't trust me. Don't trust me, Violet. Like, I'm not a trustworthy person, Violet. And Violet says, no, it doesn't. Like, I trust you. I know you. You don't know him. You don't know him, Violet. He hasn't told you anything about himself. You've assumed a lot of things, but you don't know him. And Xaden, over here, being like, no, don't trust me. I trust you. Okay, Violet. Well then, I love you too. I can't contain my love for you. Great. That's fine. And then when she finds out what the secret is, which is that he's fucking working with the Griffin Riders and that there's a big conspiracy or whatever going on, she's like, I hate you. I cannot trust you. How could you lie to me? Bitch, he told you not to trust him. He may have lied about the details, but he was very clear. And I'm not like defending him. I don't think he's like in the right. But I hate, and it's always the female character who falls for it, who's like, oh, I trust you anyways. I love you. I'm driven by my emotions and I know I trust you because my heart trusts you or whatever. No, fucking Violet. He told you not to trust him. You said you trust him. Now you don't trust him. It's really your own fault at this point. I am blaming you. I am blaming you for, and not just you, it's his fault for lying. He shouldn't have lied. He should have been like, well, if you trust me, let me like tell you the full truth now. But Violet, he told you not to trust him. He told you not to trust him. You're supposed to be a really fucking clever character. People around you have been like, don't trust him. And I get why you might react that way against them. But maybe you would still be like, maybe this is a warning I should take to heart and just confront him about it and be like, tell me your secret. I need to know. I have like the right to know or whatever. I am falling for you. It's too late. Just tell me the truth and then we'll know if I trust you or not. Or just something. Just something. And then like acting like super surprised though when the secret comes out. No, fucking bullshit. Bullshit. In real life, if someone says, hey, don't trust me, would it not be the thing where you're like, okay, well, I want to trust you, but maybe like tell me why I shouldn't. And if you can't tell me why you shouldn't, maybe you're right. Maybe I shouldn't trust you because you're clearly holding a secret. I'm not saying you can't love someone. It's probably very difficult to be in love with someone you don't trust. But love is not always rational. But you can still be rational and in love. Like, you can be rational. Like, you'd be like, I don't trust you, but I love you. That's more interesting tension. That is more interesting character building. And the come down when she finds out what the secret is, if she's like, I love you and I can't stop it, but this is fucking terrible what you've done. Like, you've lied. This lie, it affects me. It shatters my world. That's more interesting than her just being like, I don't know if I can ever love you. Okay, Violet. Well, he did tell you not to trust him and not to fall in love with him. So it's fucking on you and him, but it's on you too. I just hate it. I find it annoying. I have seen it so many times and it's just literally frustrating. And I cannot imagine, I imagine they're going to talk about it in the next book. I can't imagine it's going to like last for long. I'm not going to find out. I'm not reading book 2. But it's not like interesting. It's boring, it's bullshit, and it's just done before 1,000,000 fucking times. Another trope I hate, and I hate this in Sarah J. Maas books too. That's the other series where I see this a lot. Her stuff. Violet becomes backtracking a lot. I should say the trope I hate is when a character becomes literally so powerful that it's not really conceivable that there is a threat, or at least a threat that has been established up until this point in the book, and you'll have to wait for either the end of the book or for later books in the series to see an actual threat, which we do see the Venin or the Venin as a threat in this book, and I will talk about them in a minute, but they were fucking disappointing. Violet starts off as a character, I don't want to call her weak, but in the eyes of the characters around her, she's seen as weak. She's seen as easy pickings. She is the first person voted off the island, or conversely, the one kept the longest, so that easy picking at the end. But she is not up to the same caliber as her classmates, and I think that is completely fair to say. She's only had 6 months of training for this. She is not prepared in the way other people are, and that makes her not as much of a competitor. And she's also a target because her mother is like a general. I don't even remember the mother's position. Her mother is important in the government. By the way, okay, total side note, but I like didn't know there was a monarchy in this series until like near the end when we meet the king. I thought it was a military government. I don't know if that's on me or the book, but she's a target and everyone around her is trying to kill her, or they might be protecting her, but they're not like, they can't coddle her necessarily. Dain tries to. Dain was fucking annoying. You knew he was a problem from the beginning. He was just like toxic from the beginning. That's like, a toxic character does not make a toxic book. He's not a good guy. It's fine. She's like the bottom. She's the bottom of the food chain. Then she does training, and that's a great way to power up and build a character up. And she gets better, but she's still not like the best. She's still not top dog, and that's okay. She bonds with 2 dragons. She bonds with Taryn and Andarna, which, wow, that levels her up a lot. But she's still not necessarily top dog, because again, she's lacking that training, and she doesn't have her signet yet. And even with Andarna's little power, that's not something she can rely on. And I was like, okay, this is like a decent power level. Other dragon riders are still a threat, but you don't have to really worry about like literally every other fish in the pond, just like the ones that are more of a threat than you. And then she gets the fucking lightning power. And from that point forward, literally she's untouchable. She doesn't have to worry about anything. The threats and the stakes that are established very early on in the book from her other classmates is not a problem anymore. And I find it so annoying. This happened too with more Nesta than Farah in the ACOTAR books, where the power, Bryce as well, in Crescent City, the power levels just max out, and it's not interesting to read about the character who is super overly powerful. That's why a lot of, I'm not gonna go deep into it, but this is why a lot of Marvel films are not as interesting, because the super powered characters we're reading about are too overpowered to really believe threats against them or stakes set against them. Did I say Marvel or did I say DC? Marvel now, sort of, but DC the entire time. Superman is not really, sometimes he can be the most interesting character, but you have to really set up who that villain is. The most interesting characters are the ones who have to struggle and who have a lot of, not necessarily a lot of insurmountable stakes, but a lot of stakes. And we're set up with a character who has a lot of stakes, and she overcomes them literally just by being chosen by dragons and being lucky. There's nothing that the dragons chose her for a reason, like she's a good person or whatever. But is she? I mean, she doesn't. Yeah. Well, I mean, she's not a bad person, but there's nothing about her skills that she's working on growing that makes her more powerful. She just gets the power and maxes out, and it's boring, and I hated it. It doesn't disregard or erase her disability at any point, but it also sort of, it makes it hard to be like, oh, you have lived with a difficulty other people haven't lived with, a challenge other people haven't lived with. Once she sort of maxes out, she'll mention like wrapping joints or whatever, but she doesn't even think in the same way that she thought before. And it just, again, poor character development, but also just sort of erases some aspect of living with a disability for this character. But the Venin, whatever, however you say it, who fucking knows? We're not scary. We don't get enough build up for them to be scary. I get that they're very powerful and they've been a problem, and that their constant threat has kind of been erased from this world, except for on a need-to-know basis. But I don't think we were given enough information about them leading up to their reveal to really find them as much a threat as they should have been. I don't really have much more to say on it than that, except that the reveal, again, very predictable. And then it was like, oh, they're just the numbers are bigger, is really what it was. Like, once Violet is able to aim her lightning, I get it. She'll be able to just take these people out left and right. And again, not interesting. We're just scaling up the villains because we've scaled the protagonist up so much. And we'll probably just keep scaling up the villains without having set it into motion early on in the first book, in this book. And yeah, they weren't scary. And yeah, we get like hints like wyverns, ooh, scary. But honestly, why were they scary? Why were they scary? I wasn't scared. When they killed, I don't even remember his name. When they killed what's his face? Liam. Like, that's sad. I did actually get a little sad, but I wasn't like, broken over it. The last big gripe does kind of come down to the world building. In an adult novel, like I said, I expect more world building, more well thought out world building than in a YA novel. Because YA novels don't have as much space, nor do they necessarily cover as much plot as an adult novel. That's not to say there aren't fantastic YA novels out there with amazing world building. Off the top of my head, I can name a lot. I really like the Witchlander series, the Strange to Dreamer duet, actually anything Laini Taylor has written. I think that a more recent book, Little Thieves by Margaret Owen, does a really good job. I think that if we're talking about more realistic, The Raven Cycle has a really good world building that fits the rules. I would even argue, I've only read the first book in the Mirror Visitor Quartet, but the world building there, it's great, it's expansive. You have not just physical world building, but mental and emotional world building. We have characters that feel like they have existed in this world and not in our world. They think in line with this world and this world's values, and not the real world. Adult fantasy, that's like the standard I do expect. The characters. Sometimes the world that is in an adult fantasy is very similar to the world that we live in today. And sometimes it's not. I recently read Kushiel's Dart by Jacqueline Carey, which, besides being just a fantastic book on its own, definitely nails this. The characters in that book think differently and have different values and different expectations and different morality systems than we do in our world. And they align with that. And there's a lot of different morality systems, and they align with whichever one they grew up in. If we're going to go with an even more extreme one, A Taste of Gold and Iron is a really great example of a world with a different morality system, a different culture, a different way of thinking and way of life, and the characters align with it. I expect that sort of thing, even if it is not alien to our world. I expect that to exist in adult fantasy books as part of the world building, if you expect me to believe that I am literally reading about second world fantasy. Fourth Wing does not really accomplish that. Yes, we have some characters who seem to think in line with that world, but we have a world, a continent, a country that is under a lot of martial stress. They have been at war for a very long time. Enrolling in this war school with dragons is a big deal and kind of an honor. And dragons are an integral part of their culture. This war is an integral part of their culture. The fact that their morality system aligns so closely to ours makes no sense to me. And I bring this up in particular because Violet refuses to kill anyone. And most particularly, it's, what is his name? It's not Blake, but it's like something like Blake. Jack. His name is Jack. She refuses to kill Jack. Jack is a problem for her and for other people throughout the book. He has literally killed other people in front of her. And she is like, I can't kill him. She can't kill fucking anyone. And this is supposed to be a mark of her being a good person and a compassionate person. And let's be honest, Jack is a psychopath, but he's probably thinking more in line with what the world would actually be like if you grew up in a world like this. No, he's not a good person, and I'm not on Jack's side. And I understand her maybe sparing him once, like at the beginning when they crossed, even though she literally just saw him murder someone else. What's the fucking point of letting him live after that literally every time you've had the opportunity to kill him and you choose not to? It doesn't make sense. It makes her seem like an idiot. It makes her seem less compassionate because she's literally putting everyone else at danger because she's not killing Jack Barlow, I think is his last name. Jack Barlow. She hasn't killed him. She's had multiple chances. And she says no. No. Violet, other people's blood is on your hands now. I don't know what to tell you. And then when she does kill him, she vomits. That's fine. I think that's fair. It's a good reaction. And it's important that we see her, regardless of what sort of society we live in, it's important, or she lives in, it's important to see her reaction to her first murder, her killing a first person. But it's like, oh my god, the biggest deal ever, and Xaden is coddling her and other people are coddling her, and it's like, but that's what everyone's doing. And Jack Barlow was a problem and a liability. And her regret over it, I get it on one level, that makes sense. but on another level, I don't get it. I feel like it just does not align with this sort of world. It doesn't make sense in there. And I think that this is the biggest weakness of the world building in general in this book. Is it is a book that wants to follow the rules of our society and doesn't align with the rules of the society within the book. So it's a little jarring. That's my last gripe. That's it, though. I'm not reading anything else Rebecca Yarros writes. I can't imagine any reality where I do. I'm actually going to be passing off Fourth Wing to a coworker who wanted to read it, and I'll unhaul the book. I'll probably pass it around to whoever else wants to read it, and then end up unhauling it. It was just so boring. I don't think it was bad. I don't think it's worth burning. I think that there are a lot worse books out there, and I legitimately am happy for you if you enjoyed this book. But if you are like me and you went into this cynically, or you are thinking very cynically about this book, this are my thoughts. This are my thoughts. I went into it very cynical. Which is why I've called this video something like a Cynic Reviews, or something like that. If you liked this content and you want to see more, please consider subscribing. I would seriously appreciate having you here. And if you are already subscribed, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. It means the world to me that you are here. I post twice a week is my goal right now, and I think I'm accomplishing it. Or at least starting to. I post twice a week, and it's always bookish content all the time. If you are somewhere cold, I hope you're staying warm. And if you're somewhere warm, I hope you're staying comfortable. But most of all, I hope you're reading a great book. I will see you guys next time. Bye.